The barista at Riverside Coffee House handed me my fourth espresso of the morning. I could tell from her pitying look that she recognized me as the guy who'd been camping here since they opened at 6 a.m. What she didn't know was that I wasn't. Here for the caffeine or the free Wi-Fi? I was here because this was the only place in Portland where I could watch my own life unfold through the window without anyone noticing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Across the street, Ryan Martinez stepped out of the sleek black Tesla that used to be mine. Wearing the custom-tailored Navy suit I'd saved 3 months to buy, and checking the Rolex Submariner that our grandfather had left specifically to me. In his will, he looked confident, successful, happy. Everything I used to be before he systematically dismantled my existence and rebuilt it as his own. The worst part wasn't watching him wear my clothes or drive my car. It was seeing Emma Chen laugh at something he said as she linked her arm through his, same way she used to do with me when we walked into TechFlow Solutions together every morning. 3 years ago, she was my girlfriend, planning our future. Talking about the house we'd buy in Hillsdale District? Now she was wearing an engagement ring that sparkled in the morning sun, completely unaware that the man she was about to marry had stolen every meaningful relationship, every achievement, every dream from his identical twin brother. But here's what Ryan didn't know, what Emma didn't know, what none of them suspected. I remembered everything. Every conversation he'd had pretending to be me, every lie he'd constructed, every carefully orchestrated moment where he slowly replaced me in my own life. While everyone else had been manipulated into forgetting the real Jake Martinez, I had been watching, learning, documenting every detail of his elaborate deception. The first crack in my perfect life appeared on a Tuesday morning in September. 3 years and 4 months ago, I was rushing to catch the MAX train to downtown Portland, already running late for the quarterly presentation that could secure my promotion to senior developer at TechFlow Solutions. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Thompson, my best friend since college. "Dude, great job at the presentation yesterday. Emma said you killed it. Drinks tonight to celebrate the promotion." I stared at the message, my coffee growing cold in my hand. I hadn't given any presentation yesterday. I'd been home with food poisoning, barely able to keep water down, let alone deliver the career-defining pitch I'd been preparing for weeks. But according to Marcus, not only had I given the presentation, I'd apparently nailed it so thoroughly that I'd already received the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. My hands shook as I called Emma, my girlfriend of 18 months, the woman I was planning to propose to on her birthday next month. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with excitement. "Jake, I was just thinking about you. I'm so proud of how you handled everything yesterday. When you walked into that conference room and commanded the attention of every executive in the company, I knew you were going to change our lives forever." She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I love you so much. I can't wait to see what amazing thing you do next." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the platform just as the train arrived. Emma thought she'd been watching me give the most important presentation of my career while I was actually curled up in my apartment. Alternating between my bed and the bathroom floor, someone had taken my place, my moment, my future, and somehow convinced everyone that they were me. That evening, I sat in my apartment at 2847 Oak Street, staring at my laptop screen as I scrolled through the company's internal newsletter. There it was, in full color, a photo of me shaking hands with CEO Margaret Foster, accepting the promotion to senior software developer, except it wasn't me. The facial features were identical, the height and build were exactly the same, but I could see subtle differences that no one else would notice. The way he held his left shoulder slightly higher, the practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, the confident posture that I'd never quite mastered in high-pressure situations. My twin brother Ryan had somehow infiltrated my workplace, stolen my presentation, and claimed my promotion. But how? We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since our explosive argument about our grandfather's will. Ryan had always been jealous of the close relationship I'd shared with Grandpa Martinez, especially when the will revealed that I'd inherited not just the Rolex, but also the vintage muscle car and the majority of his savings. Ryan had accused me of manipulating a dying old man, of poisoning our grandfather against him. The fight had been brutal, ending with Ryan storming out of the funeral reception and blocking my number. I thought he'd moved to Seattle to start fresh. Our parents, David and Linda Martinez, had mentioned that he'd found work at some tech startup up there, that he was doing well for himself. They'd been relieved that both their sons had found success in their respective cities, never suspecting that one son was systematically destroying the other's life from the inside. Over the following weeks, I began to notice more discrepancies. Friends would reference conversations I'd never had, thank me for advice I'd never given, mention plans I'd never made. Emma would kiss me goodnight and whisper about how much she loved the new, confident version of me, how impressed she was with my sudden ambition and social skills. Marcus started inviting me to networking events and professional meets, claiming I'd expressed interest in expanding my circle, when I'd always been content with our small group of college friends. The most disturbing realization came when I checked my email one morning and found responses to messages I'd never sent. Professional correspondence with clients, personal notes to family members, even flirtatious exchanges with Emma that made my stomach turn. Someone had been accessing my accounts, responding as me, building relationships, and making commitments in my name. The writing style was almost perfect, just different enough that I could detect the subtle changes in tone and vocabulary that no one else would recognize. I started keeping detailed notes, documenting every instance where my life didn't match my memories. A notebook filled with dates, times, witness accounts, and screenshots became my obsession. I installed security cameras in my apartment, changed all my passwords, and began carrying a digital recorder everywhere I went. If someone was impersonating me, I was going to prove it. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening in November. I'd been working late at the office, trying to catch up on projects that I apparently should have already completed, when I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator as I passed the 7th floor. I heard a familiar laugh echoing from the conference room. My laugh, but not quite. The same cadence, the same pitch, but with an undertone of satisfaction that I'd never possessed. I pressed my ear to the door and listened as Ryan's voice, perfectly mimicking mine, charmed a room full of potential investors. He was presenting software architecture that I'd designed, using my research, my code, my innovative solutions to problems that had stumped our team for months. But he was presenting it all as his own work, weaving a narrative about his vision for the company's future that had the investors hanging on every word. Through the crack in the door, I watched my brother command the room with a confidence I'd never managed to project. He knew exactly when to pause for effect, when to lean forward conspiratorially, when to flash the smile that made people want to trust him. This wasn't just identity theft. It was identity perfection. Ryan had taken everything that made me who I was and polished it into something better, more appealing, more successful. After the meeting ended and the investors filed out, shaking hands with the man they believed was Jake Martinez, I followed Ryan to the parking garage. I watched him climb into my Tesla, adjust the mirrors to accommodate his slightly different posture, and drive away to what I assumed was my apartment. But instead of heading toward Oak Street, he turned toward the affluent Hillsdale District. Pulling into the driveway of a beautiful craftsman-style house that I'd never seen before, Emma's car was already in the driveway, standing in the shadows. Across the street, I watched through the living room window as my girlfriend threw her arms around my brother, hitting him with the passion and love that I thought belonged to me. They moved through the house with the familiarity of a couple who'd been living together for months, sharing inside jokes and casual intimacies that spoke of a deep, established relationship. Ryan had done more than steal my job and my presentation. He'd stolen my entire life, improved upon it, and created a version of Jake Martinez that everyone preferred to the original. The woman I loved was in love with my imposter, building a future with a man she believed was me, while the real me stood alone in the cold Portland rain, watching my dreams unfold behind someone else's windows. That night, I sat in my empty apartment, with my notebook of evidence, and realized the full scope of Ryan's deception. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This wasn't a recent development or a spontaneous act of sibling rivalry. This had been a carefully orchestrated campaign spanning months, maybe even years. Every password he'd somehow obtained, every mannerism he'd perfectly copied, every relationship he'd gradually infiltrated suggested a level of planning that terrified me. But what Ryan didn't know, what he couldn't possibly suspect, was that I'd been documenting everything. While he'd been busy living my life, I'd been building a case against him, collecting proof of his fraud, learning his patterns and weaknesses. He thought he'd erased Jake Martinez and replaced him with a superior version. But the original was still here, still watching, still planning. The man who'd stolen my identity was about to discover that some things can't be replicated, and some people refuse to disappear quietly into the night. The hardest part about losing your life to someone else isn't the material things they take. It's watching them be better at being you than you ever were. Over the next 6 months, I became a ghost haunting my own existence, following Ryan through Portland as he perfected the art of being Jake Martinez. He had somehow gained access to every digital footprint I'd ever created. My LinkedIn profile now showcased achievements I'd never earned, connections I'd never made, recommendations from colleagues who praised my leadership skills and innovative thinking, which I'd barely used beyond posting. The occasional sunset photo had transformed into a carefully curated showcase of success. Professional headshots, team-building events, romantic dinners with Emma at restaurants I couldn't afford on my current salary, washing dishes at a downtown diner. The most painful discovery came when I found our old college yearbook in a box I'd forgotten about. Ryan and I were both featured in the computer science program photos and studying our faces side by side. I finally understood how he'd managed such a perfect impersonation. We weren't just identical twins. We were mirror images down to the smallest detail. The only differences were so subtle that even our parents sometimes mixed us up during childhood. A barely perceptible scar above his left eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike at age 7. The way his left canine tooth was slightly more prominent than mine. Details that only someone who'd spent years studying both faces would notice. But Ryan had advantages I'd never possessed. While I'd always been the quieter twin, more comfortable with computers than people, Ryan had inherited our father's natural charisma and our mother's ability to read social situations instinctively. He'd taken my technical skills, my job, my relationships, and enhanced them with personality traits that I'd always envied. The Jake Martinez that Ryan had created was everything I'd wished I could be, but never had the confidence to become. I started following him to his lunch meetings, sitting in neighboring restaurants, and watching him network with Portland's tech elite. He remembered names effortlessly, asked insightful questions about their businesses, and had a way of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room. These weren't skills he'd stolen from me. These were improvements he'd made to my personality, upgrades that made the fake Jake infinitely more appealing than the original. Emma had begun planning their wedding. I discovered this when I saw her Instagram post announcing their engagement, featuring a diamond ring that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 6 months. The caption read, "He proposed at the same coffee shop where we had our first real conversation 3 years ago. Jake always said he'd marry me someday, and he kept his promise." The photos showed them embracing outside Riverside Coffee House, the same place where I now spent my mornings watching my stolen life unfold. The cruelest irony was that Emma seemed genuinely happier with Ryan than she'd ever been with me. In candid photos posted by mutual friends, she glowed with a contentment I'd never managed to inspire. Ryan had somehow accessed years of our private conversations, our inside jokes, our shared memories, and weaponized them into a deeper connection than we'd ever actually shared. He knew exactly what made her laugh, what reassured her during stressful periods at her marketing job, what small gestures would make her feel truly loved. Marcus Thompson had become Ryan's closest friend, and watching their friendship develop was like observing a masterclass in social manipulation. Ryan had taken our childhood memories, our college adventures, our shared interests in obscure science fiction novels and craft beer, and used them as foundation stones for a relationship. that Marcus treasured more than our original friendship. They met for drinks every Friday, attended Portland Timbers games together, and had even planned a hiking trip to Mount Hood for Marcus's birthday. During one of these Friday night sessions at McMenamin's Tavern, I sat at the bar nursing a beer. I couldn't afford and listen to Marcus tell Ryan about his relationship troubles with his girlfriend Sarah. Marcus was pouring his heart out, seeking advice about commitment and trust, while Ryan offered wisdom and support with the authority of someone in a successful long-term relationship. The advice was actually quite good, better than anything I would have said. And I watched Marcus's face light up with gratitude as Ryan helped him work through his emotional confusion. That night I realized Ryan wasn't just stealing my life, he was improving the lives of everyone in it. Emma was happier. Marcus had a more insightful best friend. Our parents received more frequent phone calls and visits, and TechFlow Solutions was benefiting from innovations that combined my technical knowledge with Ryan's superior people skills. The fake Jake Martinez was objectively better for everyone involved than the real one had ever been. My parents presented the most complex challenge to Ryan's deception, but he'd solved it with characteristic thoroughness. During Sunday dinners, at their house in Beaverton, he displayed knowledge of family stories, childhood memories, and personal details that only the real Jake could know. But he'd enhanced these memories with a warmth and engagement that I'd never managed. Where I'd always been somewhat distant and analytical, Ryan was affectionate and present. He asked about Dad's woodworking projects with genuine interest, helped Mom with her crossword puzzles, and remembered the anniversaries and birthdays that I'd always needed phone reminders to acknowledge. Linda Martinez had even commented too. Emma, during what she thought was a private conversation that I overheard while hiding in their kitchen, that Jake seemed to have really grown into himself over the past year. She was proud of the man he'd become, grateful for the maturity and consideration he now showed, and excited about the wedding plans. My own mother preferred the imposter to her actual son. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening. In March, I'd been working a double shift at the diner, serving coffee and cleaning tables for tips that barely covered my rent on the studio apartment. I'd moved too after losing my place on Oak Street. My hands were raw from dishwater, my feet ached from standing for 14 hours, and I smelled like grease and disappointment. As I walked home through the drizzle, I passed the windows of Riverside Coffee House and saw Ryan inside. Alone at a corner table with his laptop open and a stack of documents spread around him. He was wearing my favorite sweater, the gray cashmere pullover that Emma had given me for my birthday 2 years ago, and he looked tired in a way that seemed both familiar and foreign. For a moment, watching him work late into the evening, he looked exactly like me during the countless nights I'd spent coding and debugging, fueled by caffeine and determination. The posture was identical, the focused concentration, even the way he absently ran his fingers through his hair when encountering a difficult problem. But there was something else there, something I'd never seen in my own reflection, a deep satisfaction, a sense of purpose and belonging that I'd always felt was just out of reach. Ryan had stolen my life, but in doing so he'd also assumed all of its responsibilities and pressures. The demanding clients, the impossible deadlines, the weight of other people's expectations and emotional needs. As I stood in the rain watching him shoulder burdens that had once kept me awake at night, I felt an unexpected pang of something that might have been gratitude mixed with resentment. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I'd spent 8 months documenting Ryan's deception, collecting evidence, and wallowing in victimhood. But evidence was useless if I never acted on it, and victimhood was a choice I could stop making. Ryan had proven that Jake Martinez could be successful, charismatic, and loved. But he'd done it by stealing someone else's foundation and improving upon it. If Ryan could steal my life and make it better, then I could steal it back and make it better still. I had advantages he didn't know about. I knew his patterns, his methods, his weaknesses. I understood the original Jake Martinez in ways that no imposter ever could, and I'd spent months studying how to improve that person. Ryan had shown me what was possible, but he'd also shown me exactly how to achieve it. The war for my identity was about to begin, and this time, I wouldn't be fighting from the shadows. I was going to reclaim everything that belonged to me and destroy everything he'd built in the process. After all, there could only be one Jake Martinez, and it was time for the real one to stand up. My transformation began with Sarah Williams, a librarian at Powell's Books who had no connection to my stolen life, and therefore no preconceived notions about who Jake Martinez was supposed to be. I discovered her during one of my research sessions. When I was using the library's computers to investigate Ryan's digital footprints, and she'd approached to offer help with the advanced search techniques I was struggling with. Sarah had auburn hair that caught the light streaming through the tall windows, and when she smiled, tiny wrinkles appeared at the corners of her green eyes that suggested she laughed often and genuinely. She wore vintage dresses and carried a canvas bag covered in literary quotes, and when she talked about books, her entire face animated with passion. Most importantly, she saw me as a complete stranger, which meant I could practice being the improved version of myself without the weight of expectations or comparisons. Our first real conversation happened on a Wednesday afternoon when I was researching corporate fraud cases, trying to understand the legal implications of identity theft in professional settings. Sarah noticed the intensity of my focus and brought me a cup of coffee without being asked, settling into the chair across from me with her own stack of books to catalog. Heavy reading, she observed, glancing at my screen full of legal documents and case studies. Research project or personal interest? I looked up at her, realizing this was the first genuine conversation I'd had with another human being in months. The simplicity of her question, the lack of hidden agendas or stolen memories, felt like stepping into sunlight after months in a cave. Personal interest, I said, and found myself telling her an edited version of the truth. I explained that I was dealing with someone who'd been impersonating me professionally, stealing my work and taking credit for my achievements. I kept the details vague, avoiding the family connection and the full extent of Ryan's deception. But Sarah listened with the kind of focused attention that made me remember why I'd once enjoyed talking to people. "That sounds incredibly violating," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "Having someone steal your professional identity must feel like they're erasing who you are." Words hit harder than I'd expected, and I felt something crack open in my chest. "Sometimes I wonder if maybe they're just better at being me than I am," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "That's impossible. They might be better at performing a version of you, but they can't be better at being you because they aren't you. They don't have your experiences, your perspective, your authentic relationship with the world. They're just wearing a mask that looks like your face." That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would grow into my strategy for reclaiming everything Ryan had stolen. Sarah was right. Ryan was performing Jake Martinez, but he wasn't Jake Martinez. He'd created an impressive performance based on stolen information and natural charisma, but it was still just a performance. The real Jake Martinez had something. No imposter could replicate authenticity, genuine experiences, and the motivation that comes from fighting to reclaim what's rightfully yours. I began spending more time at Powell's, ostensibly researching but actually learning how to be myself again through conversations with Sarah. She introduced me to authors I'd never heard of, recommended books that challenged my thinking, and gradually drew out aspects of my personality that had been dormant for years. With her, I discovered that I could be funny without trying too hard, thoughtful without being pretentious, and interesting without having to perform success. Sarah became my testing ground for the new Jake Martinez I was building. Not a copy of Ryan's performance, but an authentic version of myself that incorporated the lessons I'd learned from watching his improvements. I practiced active listening, learned to ask better questions, and developed the confidence that comes from having someone genuinely interested in your thoughts and opinions. Meanwhile, I continued my surveillance and documentation, but now with a different purpose. Instead of just collecting evidence of Ryan's fraud, I was studying his methods so I could surpass them. I mapped his daily routines, identified his vulnerabilities, and began planning my re-entry into my stolen life with surgical precision. The first phase of my plan involved re-establishing my digital presence. Using public computers and carefully crafted backstories, I created new social media profiles that showcased the real Jake Martinez. Not the dishwashing victim I'd become, but not the artificial perfection Ryan had constructed either. I posted about books Sarah had recommended, shared thoughtful commentary on industry trends I was genuinely passionate about, and began building a network of connections based on authentic interests rather than stolen relationships. I started attending Portland's tech meets and professional networking events, carefully avoiding the circles where Ryan operated but building my own reputation in adjacent communities. At these gatherings, I met developers and entrepreneurs who were impressed by my genuine technical knowledge and my ability to discuss complex problems without the rehearsed polish that characterized Ryan's presentations. They saw someone who understood code at a deep level, who could troubleshoot problems through intuition and experience rather than memorize solutions. The breakthrough came when I met Dr. Patricia Hayes at a seminar on workplace ethics. It was a family therapist who specialized in sibling dynamics and identity conflicts. And during the networking session afterward, I found myself telling her about my situation. Not the full truth, but enough details that she could offer professional insight into the psychological patterns I was dealing with. "What you're describing sounds like a form of psychological warfare," she said, her expression growing serious. As I outlined Ryan's systematic replacement of my identity, the perpetrator isn't just stealing external markers of success. They're attempting to erase the victim's sense of self-worth and belonging. It's a particularly cruel form of abuse because it makes the victim question their own value and authenticity. Dr. Hayes helped me understand that Ryan's success wasn't just about superior social skills or stolen opportunities. He'd identified my insecurities and self-doubts, then created a version of Jake Martinez that addressed those weaknesses while amplifying the strengths. It was psychological manipulation on a sophisticated level, designed to make everyone around me prefer the imposter to the original. But understanding Ryan's methods also revealed his greatest vulnerability. His entire identity was dependent on maintaining the deception. Every relationship he'd built, every achievement he'd claimed, every moment of happiness he'd experienced was founded on lies. He lived in constant fear of exposure, constantly vigilant about maintaining consistency in his performance. The stress of such elaborate deception had to be enormous, even if he hid it well. I began planning my counterattack with the methodical precision I'd once applied to software architecture. Every move would be calculated, every revelation timed for maximum impact. I wouldn't just expose Ryan's fraud. I would systematically dismantle the life he'd built using my foundation, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, achievement by achievement. The first target would be TechFlow Solutions. I'd created intellectual property that Ryan was claiming as his own, and I had documentation proving my original work. But more than that, I'd spent months studying his presentations and proposals, and I could identify inconsistencies in his technical knowledge that would raise questions among colleagues who understood the subject matter deeply. Emma would be more complicated. She genuinely loved the man she believed was Jake Martinez, and destroying that relationship would cause her real pain. But she deserved to know the truth about who she was planning to marry, and she deserved the opportunity to choose between the authentic Jake Martinez and the performance Ryan had created. Marcus presented perhaps the greatest challenge because his friendship with Ryan had become so central to his life. But Marcus had been my friend first, and underneath Ryan's charismatic performance, there were memories and connections that belonged exclusively to the real Jake Martinez. As I sat in Powell's Books that evening, sharing coffee with Sarah and discussing the novel she'd recommended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year. Genuine happiness. Not the performed satisfaction I'd watched Ryan display, but authentic contentment that came from being truly known and appreciated by another person. Sarah looked up from her book and smiled at me. "You seem different lately, more confident, more present. Whatever you're working through, it's clearly helping." She was right. The process of reclaiming my identity had forced me to understand who I actually was beneath the insecurities and self-doubts that Ryan had exploited. I was building something stronger than what he'd stolen, something authentic that couldn't be replicated or improved upon by an imposter. Ryan had made one crucial miscalculation in his elaborate deception. He'd assumed that the original Jake Martinez would simply disappear, too weak and passive to fight back. But months of watching him perfect my stolen life had taught me everything I needed to know about his methods, his weaknesses, and his fears. The war for my identity was about to shift from reconnaissance to active combat. And this time I wouldn't be fighting as the victim he'd left behind. I would be fighting as the man I'd become through surviving his betrayal. Armed with knowledge he didn't know I possessed and motivated by a determination he couldn't replicate, Ryan Martinez was about to discover that some things can't be stolen, only earned, and the real Jake Martinez was finally ready to collect what he was owed. The first strike came during TechFlow Solutions' annual technology symposium, where Ryan was scheduled to present the flagship project he'd been developing, using my stolen code architecture. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, documenting every line of original code, every innovative solution, every breakthrough that Ryan was claiming as his own work. I arrived at the Portland Convention Center, dressed in a sharp black suit that Sarah had helped me pick out, carrying a briefcase filled with evidence that would expose Ryan's fraud to an audience of industry professionals, investors, and TechFlow executives. But more importantly, I carried the confidence that comes from months of rebuilding yourself from the ground up. Ryan took the stage looking polished and professional, wearing the navy suit that had once been mine with the easy confidence I'd watched him perfect over the past year. As he began his presentation about revolutionary data compression algorithms, I recognized every slide, every technical explanation, every innovative concept he was describing as breakthrough thinking. It was my work refined and presented with his superior public speaking skills, but fundamentally built on intellectual property that belonged to me. I waited until he reached the technical demonstration, the moment where he would need to explain the core algorithm that made the entire system possible. This was where Ryan's performance would reveal its limitations. Because while he could memorize presentations and charm audiences, he couldn't replicate the deep understanding that comes from actually creating something from scratch. During the question and answer session, I stood up from my seat in the middle of the auditorium. "Excellent presentation," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the microphone system. "I'm particularly interested in the recursive optimization function you mentioned. Could you walk us through how you solve the memory allocation problem that typically crashes systems when processing datasets larger than 50 gigabytes? The question hit Ryan like a physical blow. I watched his confident expression falter as he realized I was asking about a specific technical challenge that only the original creator would understand intimately. The memory allocation issue was something I'd spent 3 months solving, working through dozens of failed approaches before discovering the elegant solution that made the entire system viable. Ryan's pause stretched too long, and I could see doubt beginning to form in the faces of the technical professionals in the audience. "That's a very specific question," he said, attempting to recover his composure. "The optimization function uses standard memory management protocols with some proprietary enhancements." His answer was technically accurate but completely generic, the kind of response someone might give if they understood the system's function, but not its internal mechanics. I pressed harder, asking about buffer overflow prevention, garbage collection, timing, and the specific mathematical formula I'd derived to predict optimal memory allocation for different data types. With each question, Ryan's responses became more vague and defensive. The audience began to murmur among themselves, recognizing that something was wrong. Margaret Foster, TechFlow's CEO, was frowning from her seat in the front row, clearly concerned about her star developer's sudden inability to explain his own work. After the presentation ended and the crowd began to disperse, I approached Margaret Foster directly. "Ms. Foster, I'm Jake Martinez," I said, extending my hand with a confident grip I'd learned from watching Ryan perform this same introduction dozens of times. "I believe we need to discuss some concerns about intellectual property theft." Margaret's expression sharpened with interest and alarm. As CEO of a technology company, intellectual property disputes were among her most serious concerns, especially when they involved public presentations to potential investors. She agreed to meet with me privately that afternoon, and I spent 2 hours in her office presenting documentation that proved my ownership of every major innovation Ryan had claimed as his own work. The evidence was overwhelming and original. Designed documents with timestamps predating Ryan's employment at the company. I had email correspondence with former colleagues discussing early versions of the algorithms. Most convincingly, I had detailed notes about every failed approach I'd tried before achieving the breakthrough solutions, including specific error messages and debugging processes that only the original developer would have experienced. Margaret Foster was thorough and professional, asking pointed questions about my claims and examining every piece of evidence with the skeptical eye of someone who'd built a successful company by avoiding costly mistakes. But as the meeting progressed, her expression grew increasingly grave. "If what you're telling me is accurate," she said finally, "then Ryan Martinez has committed fraud on a scale that could destroy this company's reputation and expose us to massive lawsuits from investors and clients. But I need to understand something. Why are you coming forward now? And how did someone manage to steal such extensive intellectual property without detection?" I took a deep breath and told her, carefully edited version of the truth. I explained that Ryan was my estranged twin brother, that we'd had a falling out over family issues, and that I'd only recently discovered the extent of his deception. I admitted that some of the security breaches that had allowed him access to my work had been possible because of shared family information and my own naive trust in keeping certain passwords and accounts accessible. Margaret's investigation moved swiftly once she understood the scope of the problem. Within a week, forensic accountants and IT security specialists had uncovered Ryan's systematic infiltration of company systems, his unauthorized access to proprietary information, and his fraudulent claims about his qualifications and previous work experience. The investigation revealed that Ryan had never actually worked for the Seattle startup he'd claimed on his resume. That job history had been entirely fabricated. The confrontation happened on a Friday morning in TechFlow's main conference room. Margaret had arranged for Ryan to attend what he believed was a routine project review meeting, but instead he found himself facing the CEO, the head of human resources, the company's legal counsel, and me. Ryan's face went through a series of expressions when he saw me sitting at the conference table. Surprise, recognition, fear, and finally a calculating coldness that reminded me uncomfortably of our childhood arguments. Always been the better liar between us, the one who could convince our parents that broken dishes and missing cookies were someone else's fault. "Hello, brother," I said quietly, watching his reaction carefully. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about who's been doing whose work." Ryan recovered his composure with impressive speed, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes as he tried to calculate his options. "Jake," he said with forced warmth, "I had no idea you were in Portland. This is quite a surprise." Margaret Foster interrupted his performance with cold professionalism. "Mr. Martinez, we've discovered significant irregularities in your employment. Record and serious questions about the ownership of intellectual property you've claimed as your own work. We need you to explain how you came to develop algorithms and systems that appear to have been created by your brother before you joined this company." What followed was perhaps the most uncomfortable hour of my life. Ryan denied everything, initially claiming that I was a disgruntled sibling trying to damage his career out of jealousy. He suggested that any similarities in our work were coincidental, that twins often think along parallel lines, and that my accusations were motivated by personal rather than professional grievances. But when confronted with specific evidence, timestamps, and technical details that only the original creator could know, Ryan's story began to collapse. The company's legal counsel walked him through email logs showing unauthorized access to systems, document analysis proving plagiarism, and witness statements from colleagues who'd noticed inconsistencies in his technical knowledge. The final blow came when I demonstrated live coding of the core algorithms, walking through the logic and problem-solving approach while explaining my reasoning for specific design choices. Ryan was unable to replicate this performance, clearly uncomfortable, with the hands-on technical work that formed the foundation of everything he'd claimed to create. Margaret Foster terminated Ryan's employment immediately, announcing that the company would be conducting a full audit of all projects. he'd worked on and pursuing both criminal charges for fraud and civil litigation for damages. Ryan was escorted from the building by security, his access to all company systems revoked. His company laptop and phone confiscated as evidence. As I watched my brother walk across the parking lot toward the Tesla that would soon be repossessed, I felt an unexpected, a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I'd won the first major battle in reclaiming my identity. But victory came with the knowledge that I'd just destroyed the career of someone who shared my DNA, my childhood memories, and my face. That evening, I called Sarah to tell her about the confrontation. She listened quietly as I described the meeting, the evidence, and Ryan's defeated expression when he finally realized that his elaborate deception had been exposed. "How do you feel?" she asked when I finished the story. I considered her question carefully. "Relieved," I said finally, "but also empty somehow. I spent so long planning this moment, and now that it's over, I'm not sure what comes next." Sarah was quiet for a moment before responding. "What comes next is rebuilding your life as yourself, not in reaction to what he stole. You've proven you can reclaim what was taken, but now you need to figure out what you actually want to build." Her words stayed with me as I sat in my small apartment that night, looking out at the Portland skyline and thinking about Emma, Marcus, and all the other relationships that Ryan had stolen and corrupted. Exposing his fraud at TechFlow had been the easy part because it involved concrete evidence and legal consequences. Reclaiming my personal relationships would require something much more difficult, convincing people who'd been manipulated too. Love an imposter that the original was worth loving too. But for the first time in over a year, I felt like myself again. Not the victim who'd been watching his life from the shadows, and not the performance that Ryan had created, but the authentic Jake Martinez, who'd learned from surviving betrayal and emerged stronger than before. The war for my identity was far from over, but I'd won the first decisive victory, and that gave me hope that everything else could be reclaimed as well. The text message from Emma arrived at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after. Ryan's termination from TechFlow became public knowledge throughout Portland's tech community. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Coffee House. Come alone." I stared at the message, recognizing the directness that had always characterized Emma's communication style, but sensing an undertone of something I couldn't quite identify. Anger, maybe? Or disappointment? Possibly both. She'd been radio silent since the news broke about Ryan's fraud. I'd respected her need for space, while she processed the revelation that the man she'd planned to marry was not who she thought he was. The next afternoon, I arrived at Riverside Coffee House 15 minutes early, choosing the same corner table where I'd spent countless mornings watching my stolen life unfold through the windows. Emma walked in exactly at 2 o'clock, looking composed but tired, wearing the blue dress I remembered buying her for her birthday 18 months ago. Back when we were still together, and I still believed our future was secure, she sat down across from me without ordering anything, her hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable. "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for weeks," she began, her voice steady but strained. "I keep starting conversations in my head, but they all sound inadequate." I waited, understanding that this moment belonged to her, that she needed to process her own experience of betrayal and confusion before we could address whatever remained between us. "I loved him," she said simply. "Loved Ryan, believing he was you. I loved the confidence he had, the way he made me feel like I was the center of his world, the way he seemed to have grown into this incredible version of himself. I was planning to spend my life with someone who never actually existed." Her words hit harder than I'd expected. Hearing Emma describe her love for Ryan, even knowing it had been built on deception, stirred up feelings I'd been trying to suppress. Jealousy, inadequacy, and the painful knowledge that she'd been happier with my imposter than she'd ever been with me. "But here's what I keep coming back to," Emma continued, looking directly at me for the first time since sitting down. "The man I fell in love with had your memories, your sense of humor, your way of thinking about problems. He knew stories about your childhood that only you could know. He understood my fears and dreams because you'd shared them with him, probably. During some conversation you forgot, but he somehow remembered." I started to speak, to explain how Ryan had gained access to our private communications, but Emma held up her hand to stop me. "I'm not finished," she said. "What I realized is that the person I loved was a combination of who you actually are and who Ryan thought you could become. He took your foundation and built something spectacular on top of it, but the foundation was still yours. The question I've been struggling with is whether the real Jake Martinez can be as wonderful as the version Ryan created." The conversation was heading in a direction I hadn't anticipated. I felt a flutter of something that might have been hope mixed with terror. "Emma, I know I'm not the same person I was before all this happened. Losing everything, having to rebuild myself from nothing, it's changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I can't promise to be the confident, charismatic version that Ryan performed, but I can promise to be authentic." Emma smiled for the first time since sitting down, and I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her. "I don't want you to be Ryan's version of Jake Martinez," she said. "I want you to be your version of Jake Martinez." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.